Hello, hello. I'm so excited for you guys to listen to today's episode. I am talking with therapist Liana Ross, and she is an EMDR therapist based in Long Island. But she's actually quite different than a lot of the other therapists that I've had on the podcast, as she does not have her own private practice. She happily works at a private paid group practice where she serves as clinical director and also sees one on one therapy clients. She is a really fun follow on Instagram. She talks a lot about reality TV and does a really great job of being relatable on Instagram and bringing in like a lighthearted, humorous energy. Even though she talks about really serious topics, her niche on Instagram is trauma, after all. But Liana does in this episode share sort of about all the different benefits that she's seen since really going all in on Instagram and showing up authentically with reels, right? So this has included like building friendships, growing her professional network, mentoring other therapists, sort of having like a creative outlet, and of course, getting more private paid clients. So I hope that you enjoy this episode and send Liana a DM and let her know what you think. All right. Hi, Liana. Welcome. I'm so excited to have you on the podcast today.
Hey, thank you so much for having me. I'm so excited to be here.
Yeah, let's start off by telling folks a little bit about who you are, where you're located, where they can find you on Instagram.
Sure. So I am located and licensed in New York. I'm a licensed mental health counselor and a CASAC, so I specialize in substance abuse and addiction as well. And I am the clinical director of a group practice, a self-pay group practice in Long Island in Cold Spring Harbor. And I'm the clinical director, so I oversee all the licensed clinicians. And you can find me on Instagram at your trauma therapist.
Awesome. So you've been in the Reels membership for a while now and on Instagram too for a few years. Tell me a little bit about what made you want to get on Instagram and kind of what that journey was like for you getting started.
Yeah, so I actually started on Instagram, aside from my personal account, having like a fitness account when that was a big popular space to be in.
Yeah.
And because I was very into weightlifting and I am still, but so I had the practice of being on social media, even though it was extremely nerve-wracking and I honestly felt ashamed by it and felt really embarrassed and had a lot of anxiety around it. And then as time went on, and as soon as I got licensed, I started to post more about mental health. And of course, it started as like the generic type of like educational stuff that you see all the time and reposting quotes and everything. But I really was such at a different point than where I am now and niching down because I was
Hmm.
so general. And I think it was also not wanting to be scarce and not wanting to cut myself short of my other specialties outside of trauma. And so that has been a big evolve within my experience on Instagram. And then, of course, I found your account, which was really the big transitional point for me to niche down, understand like how the Instagram can help me
Yeah.
and how I can have this role on Instagram rather than just posting and throwing spaghetti at the wall.
Yeah. Let's go back for a bit. I'm curious about like the guilt and shame that came up when you were doing like the fitness account and also what sort of like kept you in that or kept you motivated to keep posting despite feeling kind of icky about it.
Yeah, so I think the guilt and shame, it was obviously my own stuff coming up because I have always struggled with social anxiety. And I think I didn't want people to think that I was cocky or I thought so much of myself, or, I wouldn't want to be that guy setting my camera up in the gym, even though I
Hmm.
was. And so and then I think I would also be very sensitive to what people would say, right? Even if I heard my friends make a little joke, I would feel super self-conscious
Yeah.
about the things I was posting, or is this corny? Is this just dumb? Or um, I just didn't want to be perceived as cocky, which I'm far from that.
Yeah.
And um, and then I'm sorry, what was the
Did
second question?
did you have like goals at that time, I guess, of like was it to document your own journey or did you want to kind of go into the influencer space or do fitness coaching with people or what kind of kept you posting despite it feeling pretty hard to show up and sort of like receive judgment from others?
Yeah, it's funny. I really didn't have a huge goal. I think I just really was engulfed in that world of fitness and quote unquote healthy eating.
Mm-hmm.
And of course, it was disordered for my own experience. I was still in my disordered relationship with food and very engulfed in that. And because it can become an obsession.
Yeah.
And so I really didn't know anything else. And so it was almost like a way for me to express or yeah, I guess express my current lifestyle of being
Mm-hmm.
having a disordered relationship with food and exercise. And I think also getting a false validation from it as well. So it's funny that that was almost my goal and it wasn't even like influencer, it wasn't
Yeah.
even getting money, it wasn't even coaching. It was literally like, "Hey, here's my stuff and this is what I'm doing," but it's really a very self-absorbed and like this almost like a diary.
Yeah, for sure. When you got fully licensed and started making mental health content, did you kind of pivot on that same account or did you start a new fresh one?
I believe I started a new fresh one because I
Yeah.
actually tried to look back at my old stories to cringe at myself and and it wasn't there. And I'm like, wow, I guess I did create a new one. So I did actually create a new one right as soon as I got licensed in 2020 because I actually started it as a food prep type of company for
Yeah.
a hot second. And then I, of course, shifted. But yeah, that was completely new in 2020.
Gotcha. Cool. So you start posting sort of like this generic mental health content. How was that performing at the time before you had really niched down?
Oh, terrible. I think the I think the only ones liking it were my friends and family
Yeah.
and myself.
Okay. Tell me about like the process of niching down for you, because I know that you work with sort of like a wide a range of people in your practice, but on Instagram you're a bit more focused.
Yeah, that was a scary part for me, and I think it took me a little while to actually finally niche down. I think it takes some time to hear it sometimes from multiple people to
Yeah.
be like, okay, yeah, I need to listen to this. Because I do specialize in disordered eating and substance abuse and trauma, of course, but I almost didn't want that to be lost. Like, I had a
Hmm.
fear that I would no longer see clients who struggled with substance use, or no longer see clients, or people would never know that I specialize in disordered eating. And so it I had to get over the fact that I wasn't turning that stuff away. It was like this was what's necessary for me to show up on Instagram and for people to connect with me.
Yeah.
Because I even use myself as an example. Like if I go on Instagram and I'm looking for a therapist, especially if they're out of network, I could find a generalist anywhere, right?
Yeah.
Like if I have a specific problem, I'm going to need to find a therapist who really knows their stuff. So I had to turn it on myself to kind of really understand it.
Yeah. What niche did you end up going with for Instagram in particular?
I ended up going with trauma because I felt like it was very it really covered a large range of my specialties,
Yeah.
but I really went down to childhood trauma and relationship trauma, which I know I could probably even niche down even more
Hmm.
to either relationship or childhood. And so that's kind of like where I'm at, and the question of like, should I even niche down even more? But that's where I am now.
Cool. I want to talk about you getting clients from Instagram in a second because I know you've been really successful with that. But I'm curious how you've kind of maintained the other portions of your caseload, sort of more like people in active substance use or addiction or disordered eating. Where are you kind of getting clients from for those specialties outside of Instagram?
Yeah, I would say it's word of mouth. A
Yeah.
lot of therapists that I've met on Instagram or even like in the real world as well. I have a large group of community here, and also being active in those areas. So I'm actually going to be presenting at a school function around here on disordered eating. So
Hmm.
it's kind of like getting myself out there in those type of arenas and also meeting and networking with people, like whether it be an inpatient rehab or having those connections. So it's of course it's never losing that part of me, right? Just
Yeah.
because I niche down on Instagram doesn't mean I'm never going to work with substance use ever again.
Totally. And I've had a pretty similar experience too. On Instagram, I just talk about like anxious millennial woman all the time, but about a third of my caseload is teenage girls. And, it's just too hard to on Instagram. It's teenage girls with anxiety, but even giving examples of the things that teenagers are anxious about compared to woman in their 30s is so, so different, right? And so
Hmm.
if I was talking on, Instagram about like, what are you going to wear to prom? Or he left you on red on Snapchat, or you're like anxious about this test, I would lose all the 30 something year olds in my audience because they're not interested in that kind of content. Doesn't relate
Hmm.
to them. And so I've really gone heavy on the networking piece too, for sort of like filling that other side of my caseload, which I think has felt really nice to sort of take this pressure off that even as somebody who's like so all in on Instagram, it doesn't have to be your everything and your end all be all and who you are as a therapist and your entire business.
Yeah, yeah, and it also forces us out of our comfort zone because I know networking can be really scary, and I know it was
Mm-hmm.
for me. And celebrating those parts of ourselves, right? Like I have worked in this field for a little bit, and like doing substance use or disordered eating, it's like I have to put in that extra effort in a different way. So I think it ends up helping us also as clinicians.
Totally. So you sort of get this courage, you decide that you're going to niche down and really specifically talk about trauma. How did that sort of shift things for you on Instagram?
It definitely made it easier
Mm-hmm. How so?
to make content because it wasn't like, well, what am I going to post today, or what am I going to choose from today? What bucket am I going to choose from? I was able to keep it very succinct, and also even trauma within itself is very broad.
Yeah.
So really having to niche down even more, whether it be about attachment styles and how that comes from our childhood. So it actually made me more excited to post on
Mm-hmm.
social media rather than posting about, it could be bipolar disorder, right? Like I have clients with bipolar, but I'm not excited about posting about it,
Yeah.
right? So like when I feel excited about something, that's when I know I'm doing something right.
Yeah, for sure. Tell me about your approach with like sort of coming up with Reels ideas or taking the ideas in the membership and implementing them and making them your own. What does that look like for you?
Something that I've learned is to incorporate my personality
Mm-hmm.
because I think I received some positive feedback on some of the funnier or humorous type of reels. Even if it's a talking head style reel, I incorporate how I use my hands a lot when I talk,
Yeah.
or just the way I talk to anyone, right? Like I'm not sitting there just straight face talking, even though sometimes I could be. But I try to be as natural as possible because then it'll feel authentic. It
Yeah.
won't, because we all know that feeling of when you post something and it's like, that doesn't feel like me. It almost feels like I took a post from someone else.
Yeah.
So I really try to be as authentic as I can. And I just posted something today from the membership about Love is Blind and
Mm-hmm.
your client having two therapists, and
Yeah.
that's one of them. And that's me, right? Like, so adding these little parts of myself because I actually do bring that to sessions. So, yeah.
Yeah, I was thinking like when I think of you, I think of like Long Island, especially since you do your meetups and stuff. But even like you can hear it in your voice and it just feels like very authentic. And then Real Housewives, I feel like you're always like chatting about the reality TV stuff.
Yes.
And I think that that's like such a huge connecting point for people. Like I'm admittedly not a reality TV girly, but it just makes you feel like so much more of a human knowing that, even though it's not a shared interest I have with you. And I imagine if it was, I'd be like all up in your DMs asking about last night's episode and stuff, right? And so just
Hmm.
having that connection with people, I think is so, so important.
Yeah. Even the other night, a client left and she was like, can we talk about the traders? And I'm
Yeah.
like, please, I need to talk about it with someone other than my husband.
Yeah. Have you sort of made like other friends on Instagram that way with like therapists and stuff or?
Oh yeah, it's pretty wild. Like I've actually made a really nice group of connections on Instagram. I even started doing EMDR consultation with another clinician I met on Instagram. So I'm working towards certification. I also started with two other clinicians, Kendall and Lindsay, Long Island therapist meetups because there were a
Mhm.
bunch of meetups in the city, and we know when we're from Long Island, we don't go to the city like that a lot, but. Um, so we wanted to do something in Long Island. And so seeing people in person was so cool. And then
Yeah.
when you actually go back to Instagram, it's like, no, I actually know these people, right?
Yeah.
And you see them a couple times a year. So, yeah, it's almost like I have this group of like therapist friends that I have never met.
Yeah. Has that done positive things for your like business or your caseload or even helped you like grow your Instagram following, do you think?
Oh, 100%. I coordinate with other therapists about referrals. I've get DMs from a lot of therapists asking, do I have room or they need an EMDR therapist and vice versa.
Yeah.
And we've even connected doing just chatting and doing like Google Meet or Zooms. And
Mhm.
I just met with someone on Friday and she's in Long Island. And I would have never met her if it wasn't for Instagram. And she
Yep.
also specializes in eating disorders. So like that connection is so important and beneficial. So it's definitely helped with the networking. And it's great because it's something that feels comfortable, that piece of networking, right? Like from Instagram, bringing into Zoom, and you don't have to leave your house unless you want to.
Totally. How about the getting clients portion? What has that been like for you from Instagram?
I've honestly, weirdly enough, have received a good amount of clients from Instagram, even
Yep.
if, let's say, they want to go through insurance or they may not be the best fit, or maybe our availability may not work out. Like, that's okay. Oh, bless you.
Thank you.
Um, but the fact that I even receive phone calls is crazy. And like,
Mm.
it is the biggest compliment where someone says, I saw your Instagram and it really resonated with me. And it's exactly what I'm going through. Or my friend saw it and they sent it to me. And I'm like, oh my God, what? Like
Yeah.
it's just wild. And I was just chatting with someone yesterday about like the possibility of deleting Psychology Today because
Hmm.
I'm like, I literally don't get really barely any from there. And I get a good amount from, of course, calls that come through the practice, but also Instagram is like the second one.
Yeah. When did that start for you? Do you remember, like, if there was a certain point of your following or like how far in you were or niching down where you really started to get clients a little more consistently?
Yeah, I think it was when I definitely started niching down. And I think after I specifically remember one of my reels like going off and going viral, and I received like 11 calls in a week.
Hmm.
And I think from there, as I continue to remain in my niche and also remain authentic and be myself on showing up on stories and being natural with it, that's also where I saw this consistent
Yeah.
intro calls come in. So I think once I felt like situated, and I'm not sure when that was, but I would say maybe like within the last, maybe a year ago it started.
Yeah.
Um, yeah.
Maybe you could talk to us a little bit about like how long it takes you to sort of come up with Instagram ideas, film them, edit them, write your caption, a little bit of your process for that, because I think you do such a good job of showing up really consistently with the content that you create. And I know that that's a big challenge for a lot of people.
Yeah, yeah, I know. I talk to a lot of people too who will say like, "Oh, I hate doing it, but I know I have to," right?
Yeah.
And I've honestly had a lot of fun with it. I feel like in my other life, I may have been like in marketing. I don't know why. Like, so it's funny. I can do it very quickly, especially with the Reels membership. I surprise myself. Like, I can come in from it for a session earlier to the office and get a reel done in like 10 minutes at
Yeah.
most. And like even when I see the real email come up, I will start brainstorming and write them
Hmm.
in my notes app. And even as I go on, I'll have more ideas come up and I'll just write it in my notes app. And by the time I'm done, I have all four ideas,
Yeah.
right? And then I can take that and then just film the trending reel, or I can film a B-roll. I can do a talking head style reel. So I fit it in like whenever I can in between sessions,
Yeah.
but I also don't overthink it. I think that's important too. And of course, it took time for me to get there because I think that helps it take less time and it
For
helps
sure.
me just get used to it and overcome some insecurities, right? Like, I don't think too much if I didn't say something completely right or or oh, that looks a little weird. Why did I do that? Right? Like it
Yep.
no one's going to notice except for me. So I think that too, not overthinking it. Um and I also find a schedule that works for me. Like I know people who will batch content and make it for like the whole month. God
Yep.
bless their souls. That's not me. Like even for the whole week, I get overwhelmed of
Yeah.
like, oh wait, what post was for what? Like I literally will do it like either for that day or the next day. Like
Yep.
it's just a way for me to keep on track. So I think that's also important too, finding a routine and system that works best for you.
Totally.
Um yeah, that's very helpful.
And I think like that changes based off seasons in your life too. So like when I first started my Instagram, I was working a full-time job and then seeing 10, 15 clients per week in the evenings. And so I was super slammed, but I was like all in on the Instagram thing. And so I was that girl who's batching content like a month at a time because I would do it on Saturday mornings. Like before I went to brunch with my girls, I was like all dolled up. I'm like, okay, I'm filming like 30 things today. Now I literally could never, like there would be no possible way I would do that. And I do an approach probably more similar to, it sounds like what you're describing, of I want to have a rough idea of what I'm going to post every day of the week, just because it helps me sort of like zoom out, be like, okay, is there variety in what I'm talking about here, that kind of thing. But then I'll just film it the day of. I'll usually write the caption the day of, and it takes me 10 minutes to post because I'm not having every day to like think about what am I going to post or what do I want to say or what's my idea here. I've already kind of like sat down and done that when I had the brain power, but to find 10, 15, 20 minutes in a day to film, edit, and write a caption feels easier to me than to spend, 3 hours batching for the week or something. And so I think that just giving yourself permission to do like however works for you and breaking it up is super helpful. But for most people, I find doing that sort of like ideating stage as one thing and then the filming, as something else is really, really helpful.
Yeah, and also like sometimes I'll just write captions or write posts as I'm watching reality TV or like
Yeah.
a documentary, right? Like because we're always on our phone anyway when we're watching something. And also using ChatGPT when you need some extra help, even if
Yeah.
it's like to write a caption or just to research something, like I've been able to find these tools, whether it be like an app that's super helpful or a video editing app, to kind of outsource in that way.
Yep. Are there some like favorite tools or apps that you use besides ChatGPT?
Yeah, I really like InShot. I don't know if
Mm-hmm.
you've ever, yeah, that
Yeah.
is great for taking away the silences. I know Instagram just came out with that feature,
Yep.
but I like using that also for the texts. I just like the way it comes up on the screen, the closed captioning. I also like the teleprompter app,
Mm-hmm.
right? Because I know when I do a talking head style reel, I forget every word. So I like being able to read it on the teleprompter because it also allows me to speak authentically.
Yep.
Canva is, my best friend. We
Yep.
all love Canva. I would say, and that's pretty much it. Those are like my
Yep.
peeps.
I recently discovered the teleprompter app like maybe 3 or 4 months ago, which is wild that I've been doing
Oh,
Instagram for so long without it. But for brand deals, you have to like send your script to the brand and they approve it. And I
right.
was having the hardest time memorizing it, like exactly as I said it. But I was like, I don't want to, go off the script and have
Yeah.
them like deny it later or something. And a friend suggested that app to me, and it has been absolutely life changing. Now I use it for talking head reels too, and it's just so nice.
Yeah. Yeah. I can't remember. No, I can't even remember what I ate for lunch.
Yeah. Very cool. What advice would you have for therapists who are maybe afraid of like not showing up? How do I put this? Who feel like they need to show up very seriously on Instagram in order to be taken seriously as a professional. And so maybe have a little bit of like pushback or resistance around being more corny or being more silly or being more relatable in their content.
Yeah, I think that honestly, for me, the way I see it is it goes back to maybe the way that we were taught. I was actually
Mm-hmm.
just talking about this with someone, a colleague, and how, in school they said you have to be a blank slate, which I agree to an extent.
Yep.
But I think we're, like we always say, we're human first, and people connect to humans.
Yep.
They don't connect to blank slates all the time. Um, and I think it's also finding confidence within yourself, right? Like,
Mhm.
I think that might also hint a little bit at imposter syndrome, where it's like, if I feel like I have to be super professional and be super serious, well, why can't I be comfortable with myself, right? Like, do
Yep.
I still think I'm good enough or professional being myself? Like two things can be true at the same time, as I love to say, right? Like, I can be professional and love Love is Blind and reality TV at the same time.
Totally.
So, not being so black and white.
I'm curious if pre-Instagram you sort of used like that same self-disclosure in session of like connecting on reality TV or making a parallel between, a character in a show or, asking how people are going to take care of themselves this weekend and like, you know, kind of bonding over what they're binge watching or whatever. Or if that felt new post Instagram.
Oh yeah, I did not do that at all. Like it's like how you get taught in school, right? It's like a client would ask me, "Are you married?" And I would say like, "Well, like tell me what's coming up for you that would make you ask me that." Right?
Yep.
Like obviously it depends on the client and what the
Mm-hmm.
situation is, but anything associated with me. Like
Yep.
I would keep as I'm completely unknown. And even now, I don't share everything. Like people
Mm-hmm.
obviously know I'm married, they know I have a kid because things do come up. But I am very careful of who I share things with, but I am nowhere near as strict with not self disclosing. I also don't disclose, like, I find that I've been on the receiving end of being a client with a therapist who self-discloses too much, and it
Yep.
just doesn't feel great.
Yep.
So I'm very aware of that line, and when it's humanness and when it's like, whose therapy session is this, mine or
Yep.
theirs?
Yeah, that makes a ton of sense. I think for me, I love doing just like a we, right? Like sometimes with anxiety, we do XYZ, right? So it just sort of like takes away some of the shame in the way that they're coping or thinking about things without saying like, here's how I struggle and here's what I do with it. And last week I was really anxious about this. And I think that so often therapists think that self-disclosure, especially on social media, needs to be really big or needs to be like filling people in on every detail of your life. But in reality, it's the littlest details. Like I feel like we've talked about reality TV so much today, and that has literally nothing to do about you or your personal life or your life outside of work, but it can still be like a huge, huge connection point.
Yeah, I also love using the we. I started doing that. I got that like tip from a supervisor, and it does take away that shame of being like, well, I think you should. Like
Yeah,
no one likes that,
for
and I
sure.
agree there's totally a way to do it.
Yeah. I'm curious if you have any thoughts on like starting your own practice one day now that your Instagram's growing, you're like getting clients consistently. Do you have any desire to leave the group that you're at or?
So if you asked me that a year ago, I probably would say yes.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's because I was in a role, I was doing more networking at that time. And your girl's tired. I didn't I didn't feel like after a while it was great. I met so many good people. I got pushed out of my comfort zone, but it had an expiration date. And then as the year was going on, myself and the owner, and he's amazing, worked towards a role that made me feel good, which was more clinical, in conjunction with my individual clients. And so moving into this role as clinical director, because I do love supervising,
Mm-hmm.
I feel very much at peace. And because I think I'm getting support in such a genuine, down to earth way, because I've been in private practice before in an insurance based one.
Yeah.
And so I know the difference between a supportive environment and a non supportive environment. And right now I feel very like grateful and just good about where I'm at.
Yeah.
And like never say never. I don't know what's going to happen in the future. It is nice not having to take care of the things that I don't want to take care of, like financial stuff
Yeah.
and billing and stuff. Um, but I'm kind of just very happy with where I'm at. And being private pay in a practice is also helpful. Um, and it's worth what, even if it's like the split
Yeah.
or right, because I'm getting so much help in other arenas.
Has the practice owner had any thoughts, positive or negatively, about you showing up on Instagram to sort of market yourself?
That's so funny because no joke, right before this, we were like filming content,
Uh-huh.
like because he is in his 50s and he's
Mhm.
like, I know I have to get on social media. I know it. So I help do the social media for the practice. And so we have filmed, like he'll send me B-rolls, I'll make the content. And so
Yep.
he even said to me today, I know I have to show up more, I have to get more personal. And so I'm like, oh, I love it. Like
Yeah.
I'm spreading the wealth. So he honestly thinks it's great. He thinks it's so cool, and it's so funny because it's like he gets self-conscious in a lot of ways with it, and it's almost like I'm mentoring him in this way. So
Yeah.
he's been like super supportive in this process, thank God.
Yeah. I think that that's so normal of like I've never met any therapist who started on Instagram and didn't feel self-conscious in the beginning. Like of course it's going to feel uncomfortable to show up, to create videos, to put yourself out there. And so it's really cool that he's kind of looking to you as the expert in that arena and really seeing how much it's done for you and your caseload and wanting to bring it in for like the rest of the practice as well.
Yeah, yeah, it's like you never know. You can always change someone's mind.
Yeah. All right, Leanna. Well, thank you so much for chatting with me today. Remind folks again where they can follow you. I feel like you are such a good inspiration for all things relatable content.
Oh, thank you. You can follow me at Your Trauma Therapist on Instagram. And thank you so much for having me. The Reels membership has been so helpful, like I always share, and I love it.
Thank you. I'll talk to you soon.